See today, is it true that the Führer was dipping his hand into the party's funds and not paying taxes? Operation Land of Fire. How the Nazis moved to South America was prepared. Auf Wiedersehen. How Martin Bormann planned to disappear and what came of it. Why didn't Hitler drive a car? What drove Air Marshal Göring insane? How did the money laundering schemes work in the Third Reich? And who inherited the Führer's wealth? In 2023, the sleepy Dutch village of Omeren was attacked by treasure hunters. The cause of the frenzy was a map that the National Archives of the Netherlands published among the documents from the Second World War period. Treasure hunters were stirred up by the information. Allegedly, the map indicated the place where German officers had buried gold and diamonds from the vaults of one of the Dutch banks. Treasure hunters dug up fields, woods, and even the land of local residents, despite their protests. The last time such a stir was in 2015. Then the media reported that in Poland, in an abandoned tunnel, they allegedly found a Nazi gold train. A mass of gold hunters rushed headlong into the mountains. The train was never found, at least officially. But there are rumors that the cunning Poles appropriated the treasures and classified all the information so as not to return the valuables to their true owners. For 80 years, treasure hunters from all over the world have been lured by the phantom glow of Nazi gold. How much wealth disappeared without a trace after the collapse of the Third Reich? And how did the fascists become the owners of a gigantic fortune? Adolf Hitler was a billionaire, a dollar billionaire to be precise. Throughout his life, the Führer portrayed himself as a modest and unassuming person in his daily life. However, in reality, he was one of the wealthiest individuals of his time. But how did he amass such a fortune, and where is Hitler's wealth now? A diary was discovered in Germany which revealed the hiding places of the Nazi treasures. This sensational news spread across the world's media in 2019. The author of the diary was a German officer, Egon Ollenhauser. In his notes, he mentioned that the Nazis, under Hitler's orders, had hidden 260 trucks filled with treasures. Historians took this information very seriously. According to Ollenhauser's records, there is approximately 28 tons of gold stored in a single hideout in Poland. Other caches contain works of art, including paintings by Botticelli, Rubens, and Caravaggio. It is known that during the retreat, the Wehrmacht and SS troops organized special trains to transport valuable items. This is a well-known part of history. To locate these hideouts, there are different theories, and it is estimated that between 10% and 30% of the treasures have been found. But it is clear that not everything has been discovered. New findings continue to emerge. According to the Nazi officer, one of the hideouts is located at the bottom of a pond, another is in a secret room in a palace, and there is another one in a well. The authenticity of the diary was confirmed by specialists from 5 German scientific institutes. 6 years have passed since the publication of this invaluable document. But has anything from the described treasures been found? In my youth, hunger was my constant companion, and during my studies in Vienna, I had to endure poverty and life without a roof over my head, wrote Adolf Hitler in his memoirs. According to historians, when the future Führer was painting in Austria, he indeed lived a modest life. However, once he became a well-known political figure, his lifestyle changed dramatically. Hitler loved money. This image of the Führer of the Third Reich, who created propaganda, seems contradictory. But Hitler had a great affection for money. As soon as he experienced a comfortable and luxurious life, he started to indulge in it. The man who positioned himself as an ascetic was actually obsessed with luxury and, accordingly, with works of art of the highest value. The leader of the Third Reich enjoyed fine dining. His particular passion was for pastries and other sweets. Hitler paid close attention to his public appearances and the clothing he wore. For example, in 1932, he ordered several waistcoats each of which would cost around 3,000 euros in today's prices. Although he disliked driving, Hitler owned a substantial car collection. As early as the 1920s, he was driven in a luxurious automobile. His garage housed many vehicles, one of which was called the Uber Auto, or super automobile. The car bodies were protected with armored plates, and the interior was equipped with firearms and a machine gun. Additionally, the headlights had excessive power to blind the enemy during a pursuit. Regarding Adolf Hitler, he acquired his first car in 1921, and subsequently, his vehicles became increasingly expensive. In other cars, the designers focused on creating a comfortable interior. Some models featured heated seats and a radio, and one vehicle even had a compact wash basin with a sink. Hitler had 3 residences. The first one was the Old Chancellery in Berlin, which he rarely visited, although he furnished it to his taste at a significant cost. However, he greatly enjoyed his other residence, an apartment in Munich, according to the recollections of his close associates. The apartment occupied the entire 3rd floor of a large 5-story building. In 1935, the apartment was renovated according to Hitler's own design, costing 120,000 Reichsmarks. It is reported that this amount was 10 times the average annual income of a German doctor, and the monthly maintenance expenses were comparable to a professor's salary. He loved modern conveniences. If we examine his residences, they were well equipped with the latest household technology. Hitler spent most of his time at his country residence, Berghof, located in the Alps. He enjoyed relaxing at this mountain resort after his release from a Bavarian prison in 1924. Initially, he rented hotel rooms, and later, he leased a chalet. When the estate was being built, Martin Bormann personally oversaw that everything was constructed according to Adolf Hitler's taste. Of course, he also managed the logistics and maintenance of the residence. According to some sources, the reconstruction of the residence cost over $200 million in today's money. The property featured an extensive park and a tea house, and the chalet was transformed into a massive building with 30 rooms, adorned with Persian carpets, expensive furniture, and works of art. During the Nazi era, idyllic photographs from the residences were frequently published. While European cities were in flames and thousands of people died daily in gas chambers, Hitler posed with his beloved dogs and the children of his close associates. Heinz Linge, Hitler's valet, recalled that his boss rarely paid for anything himself. This task was primarily handled by Martin Bormann, the Grey Cardinal of the Third Reich and the head of the National Socialist Party's Chancellery. Bormann took care of all the Führer's needs, including those of Eva Braun. Bormann even oversaw how Eva Braun spent her time at the estate, the dresses she wore, the food she ate, and whether she received flowers on behalf of Adolf Hitler. There is a legend. Once, Hitler complained that the view from his Alpine residence was spoiled by a nearby farm. Bormann quickly resolved the issue. The next time Adolf Hitler stepped outside, the farm was gone. Martin Bormann had it relocated, and the owner was moved as well. Over time, Bormann ensured that nothing obstructed Hitler's view of the beautiful surroundings. Where did Hitler obtain the money for his luxurious lifestyle? It is known that upon assuming power in the Third Reich, he refused a salary of 45,000 Reichsmarks per year. According to historians, the Führer could afford this grand gesture. When discussing Adolf Hitler's wealth, it is unlikely that we can account for it precisely because the original sources have not been preserved. However, we have indirect evidence of how he lived and earned money. Researchers believe that a significant portion of his income came from fees for articles and speeches. Yes, Hitler charged a fee for each of his passionate speeches at the NSDAP meetings. After World War I, when Adolf Hitler became actively involved in party politics, it was discovered that he was a skilled orator. He began earning money from his speeches, receiving between 200 and 250 Reichsmarks for each appearance, according to various estimates. Hitler had his own merchandise, as one might say today. From 1934, his image was printed on almost all postage stamps, and Hitler received royalties from these sales as per Bormann's instructions. In total, he earned several million Reichsmarks. He demanded royalties for all his images, including when he was depicted in paintings. Therefore, contemporary German artists who painted Adolf Hitler had to pay him for using his likeness. The sale of Nazi symbolism abroad brought Hitler foreign currency. Anything associated with him was profitable, and he was not only popular in Germany but also worldwide. According to historians, the majority of the Führer's savings came from royalties for his autobiographical book. He wrote it while imprisoned in 1923. After Hitler became the Reich Chancellor in 1933, the book became a bestseller. All libraries and universities purchased it, and it was found in the office of every government official. Hitler received 10% of the revenue from each sold copy. According to the latest data, Hitler earned approximately 8 million Reichsmarks from the book's sales. Adolf Hitler had a good understanding of his rights. As a German, he was well versed in the law, and he ensured that all necessary royalties were paid into his account. Hitler did not pay taxes on these earnings. In 1935, a court released Hitler, then the Chancellor of Germany, from a tax debt of 400,000 Reichsmarks. He did not pay any taxes for the rest of his life. According to some sources, the tax authorities made this decision after being summoned to the Gestapo for a meeting. Given even the fragmentary information about Hitler's income, it is reasonable to assume that his wealth was substantial. Hitler's fortune is estimated differently, ranging from several tens of millions to a few billion American dollars. It should be noted that these are not modern dollars, but post-war dollars, when the dollar had a different value. On April 30th, 1945, Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun took their own lives. So, who inherited the Führer's billions? On the day before his suicide, Hitler dictated his last will and testament to his secretary. It should be noted that its authenticity has raised some questions among historians. Firstly, the Soviet army was already in Berlin, and the bunker where Hitler was hiding was just over a kilometer away. Secondly, the Führer's physical and mental state was far from ideal. In his final days, Hitler was a completely degraded man. The effects of nervous strain and medication had broken him down completely. The last video footage of him shows a broken, hunched, and emaciated figure. Can you imagine this man writing such a beautiful and grandiose will? We will find out what the Führer was hoping to achieve in a few minutes. For now, let's focus on the most widespread theory. Technically, the Reich Minister of Propaganda, Joseph Goebbels, could have drafted the will. However, Hitler dictated it to his secretary and signed it consciously. But who was supposed to inherit the Führer's wealth? Hitler's will is often seen as a public relations move. In my opinion, we should question its authenticity and consider whether it truly reflects his state of mind at the time. Hitler also made statements about his art collection. He claimed that the artworks were not acquired for his personal enjoyment, but for the creation of a gallery in his hometown of Linz. However, in the spring of 1945, the museum was still in the planning stages. But did the Führer have full legal rights to his collection? He instructed that his relatives should receive, as he put it, the means necessary to maintain a modest standard of living. Who was he referring to? As is known, Hitler had no children. However, his sister Paula was still alive. She was not a Nazi, and there were no questions about her involvement. In fact, she was not a member of the Nazi Party and did not have to undergo denazification procedures. The children of Hitler's father from his first marriage, Alois Jr. and Angela, as well as their descendants, could have claimed Hitler's property. After Hitler's death, there was a sum equivalent to $330 million left in his bank account. Additionally, there were several million dollars in royalties from his book, which were held by the publisher. Hitler's money did not go to anyone. Some gold was seized from the Reichsbank, but after the war, Germany was virtually bankrupt. Therefore, it is inaccurate to say that anyone claimed Hitler's wealth. All of Hitler's assets were transferred to the Bavarian government after his death. However, there was still valuable real estate. The heirs could not claim the property until Hitler's death was officially confirmed, which did not happen until the late 1950s. In 1959, lawsuits were filed, specifically by Hitler's sister, claiming her right to inheritance from Adolf Hitler. The lawsuits were positively considered, and it was decided that something should indeed be returned to her. The Führer's Alpine residence was damaged during the bombings and later destroyed. His luxurious apartment in Munich became part of the police headquarters. In 1960, a Munich court awarded 2/3 of the territory of the Eagle's Nest Villa near Berghof to Hitler's sister, Paula. However, she did not live long enough to receive the inheritance, as she passed away the same year. Today, the Eagle's Nest is home to a restaurant. A reasonable question arises: if Hitler was one of the wealthiest people in Europe, why did he leave such a modest inheritance? According to historians, this is because, during his lifetime, the Führer did not separate his personal budget from the party's budget. When we talk about Hitler's wealth, we often remember the phrase that he did not distinguish between his own wealth and that of the party and the state. In essence, Hitler's wealth was equivalent to the wealth of Germany at that time. Historians believe that the party's budget can be understood as the entire treasury of the Third Reich. Legally, there was a distinction between state property and party property. However, in reality, the party controlled almost everything. All the capital in the country, all enterprises, and all valuable assets were under the control of the Nazi Party. Experts estimate that the Third Reich was an extremely corrupt state. However, even Hitler could not simply take money from the party's treasury or the state's coffers. Give me 1 million, 100 million, 100,000. No, it was not like that. The party's funds were distributed, including for the partial funding of the Gestapo and party government bodies. There were many consumers. However, Hitler had direct control over a fund bearing his name. It is estimated that during the war around 700 million Reichsmarks passed through this fund. Hitler used some of these funds for his personal needs. The donations to the Adolf Hitler Fund can be seen as veiled kickbacks because this fund was never audited. Where was all this money spent? Well, as the Führer of Germany, he made all the decisions. The needs of the Führer were not only met through donations from industrialists and bankers, but also through the budget of the Third Reich. For example, Hitler freely used state funds to furnish his residence in Bavaria. Many of the paintings in his collection were also purchased with public money. All these streams, from small creeks to mighty rivers, contributed to the wealth of the Führer of the German Reich, who publicly portrayed himself as an ascetic. Did Hitler's Nazi Party comrades know about his corrupt schemes? Some definitely did. For example, Martin Bormann. He even suggested some of these schemes to Hitler. Bormann was Hitler's shadow, but he did not control the wealth. Heinrich Himmler knew, but he was a man of silence. Those in his inner circle also knew, but remained silent. In general, it was not customary to talk about such things in Germany at that time. Firstly, Hitler was allowed almost everything. The state ideology implied complete loyalty to the Führer. Secondly, the entire upper echelon of the Third Reich was involved in the corrupt scheme. Hermann Göring knew, but he himself grabbed power and started doing such things that he became a byword. Göring, who became addicted to drugs after a severe injury, behaved inappropriately in the late 1930s. He dressed in colorful uniforms adorned with diamonds, sometimes wore medieval hunting attire, and even a red toga with a golden clasp, like a Roman emperor. He even kept a lion at home. Hitler was also known to be generous. Many military leaders received additional payments, what we would call under the table today. For example, When Field Marshal von Bock was relieved of his command after the defeat near Moscow, he immediately contacted Berlin to inquire whether this meant he would no longer receive money from the secret account. The global economic crisis of the 1930s severely impacted Germany's economy. When Hitler came to power, there were 56 tons of gold in the National Bank. War preparations depleted the treasury. By 1938, the gold reserves had decreased threefold, down to 15 tons. The Nazis found a source of income. They plundered the gold reserves of European countries. Hitler acquired 78 tons of gold after the Anschluss with Austria and 24.5 tons after the annexation of Czechoslovakia. The Nazis obtained over 350 tons of gold in Belgium and the Netherlands. 100 tons were taken by the Hitlerites after the occupation of Italy. The Third Reich was essentially a massive business machine. From the very beginning, all projects related to the seizure of new territories were clearly linked to the issue of looting in those areas. Yes, that is, to capture territory not only to gain living space, but also to plunder it. Thus, valuables were taken from various states, including the Soviet Union. The bank's gold bars alone were worth $500 million. In 1945, Germany's gold reserves amounted to over 900 tons. The Hitlerites looted not only bank vaults, the Nazis took hundreds of millions of Reichsmarks from the Jews. Savings, jewelry, even gold crowns, everything went into the Third Reich's repositories. One concentration camp alone, Auschwitz, yielded 8 tons of dental gold. Party officials, from the lowest to the highest levels, benefited from this. The highest level allowed them to purchase cultural valuables, build castles and palaces, and open accounts in Swiss banks or other foreign states. The middle and lower levels of party bosses improved the material well-being of these party officials. In 1945, an SS officer named Bruno Melmer fell into the hands of the Americans. It turned out that he was responsible for transferring the valuables taken from the victims of the concentration camps. According to some reports, 76 containers were sent to the Reichsbank. Each weighed around 2.5 tons. Even after their arrest, the victims of the Holocaust brought income to the Hitlerites. In many cases, they even paid money to reach these camps, that is, for their transportation by train. But of course, they were not told that they were being taken to a death camp. Instead, they were told they were being evacuated to better living conditions. You understand what awaited them there. Until their deaths, the concentration camp prisoners brought income to the Third Reich at industrial enterprises. For example, the SS provided 8,000 prisoners to a German company for the construction of a new factory. In return, the enterprise supplied the SS with the gas Zyklon B at a discount, which was used in the gas chambers. In total, they murdered over 1 million people. One element of corruption in the Third Reich was the ability to obtain quotas for people, free labor to work in factories and plants. We can imagine that, right? In addition, we can add that young people were taken from the occupied territories to provide services. They were forced to work for free on these enterprises, receiving only symbolic food and living in unbearable conditions, constantly dying from diseases and starvation. Others were brought in to replace them. Corporations profited from this because there was free labor. The Hitlerites eagerly looted collections of artworks. In his youth, Hitler was denied admission to the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts. Hitler, considering himself an unrecognized artist, painted pictures that professionals rated between a 2 and a 3, or even lower. Hitler also considered himself an expert in painting. His tastes were quite specific. He preferred classical portraits and landscapes. He mostly referred to 20th century art as degenerate. Hitler wanted to gather the best samples of classical European art in a specially created museum in his hometown of Linz. Hitler dreamed of creating his own museum in this small town, thus immortalizing his memory in the Führer's museum. He wanted to gather there all the best of what he loved and saw as the brilliance and beauty of visual art. Masterpieces of German art that had left the country for various reasons in the past were also to be exhibited in this museum. 3 volumes were compiled. A very fundamental work, completed in 1940 and presented as a brief report to the rulers of the Nazi regime, which led to the decision that Germany would immediately issue a diplomatic note to the world, informing them of which collections would be seized and from whom. Sometimes the Nazis bought, but most often looted, private collections in occupied countries. In Western Europe, France suffered the most. In Paris, a full-scale headquarters was set up to plan looting operations, which included 6 dozen people, including art experts who acted as informants. This was all controlled by Hermann Göring and Foreign Minister Ribbentrop. Lists of the richest Jewish collections were compiled, and the French branch of the Rothschild bankers was immediately included. According to some reports, the Germans took over 5,000 works of art from the collection of Baron Louis Rothschild alone. The treasure-hunting organization called the Western Agency, led by Reichsleiter Rosenberg, seized nearly 22,000 pieces of art in the occupied countries during its operations. For example, before the war, over 42,000 pieces of art were kept in the Catherine Palace in Tsarskoye Selo. After the German retreat, 3,000 were missing. Perhaps the most important trophy of the Hitlerites is the famous Amber Room, sometimes called the Amber Cabinet. It was once a gift from the German Kaiser to Peter the Great and was installed in the interiors of the Catherine Palace, but unfortunately it was taken by the Nazis first to Königsberg, and according to eyewitnesses, some panels were installed in the halls of Königsberg Castle. But then the trail goes cold. Interestingly, this unprecedented looting enriched not only the Nazis, but also art dealers from neutral Switzerland. 3 galleries in Bern, Lucerne, and Zurich specialized in selling art taken from private collections. According to Swiss law, 5 years after purchase, the owner is considered in good faith, so much of the stolen wartime property cannot be returned to this day. Thus, Hitler's empire possessed incredible treasures. What became of them? On May 15, 1945, Soviet troops discovered only 90 gold bars in the Reichsbank cellars. This is just over a ton. Everything else disappeared without a trace. There is a version that Germany simply spent its gold reserves. Germany purchased oil. Germany bought petroleum products. Germany bought rubber. Germany paid the Swedes for bearings and ore. The Swedes took, gold. Therefore, even people's gold crowns were removed and given in exchange for strategic raw material supplies. They really bought weapons with it, not only in Germany. Interestingly, raw materials, fuel, and so on were purchased, for example, in the USA up to 1943, inclusive. According to another version, as early as 1944, the elite of the Third Reich began preparing to flee and first started working on ways to export private and state savings from the country. According to some reports, several hundred tons of Nazi gold were kept in anonymous accounts in Swiss banks. Anonymous accounts started to be opened in Switzerland as early as the 1930s. Party workers and industrialists opened these accounts to preserve their wealth, possibly obtained through corrupt means. During a U.S. Senate investigation, it was revealed that a major Swiss bank serviced some Nazi accounts until the year 2020, including those of military officials convicted in the Nuremberg trials. Nazis would arrive under assumed names, and since the accounts were numbered rather than named, they could access the gold and other valuables by providing the account numbers. I believe that the neo-Nazi movement in Europe was sustained for many years precisely because of these accounts, primarily held in Swiss banks. It is possible that the anonymous Swiss bank accounts allowed thousands of Hitler's followers to relocate to South America. Additionally, according to some reports, the treasures of the Reich were not only moved through banks but also physically transported as gold bars. Front companies were set up disguised as Swiss firms or corporations to hide their German origins and prevent their accounts from being frozen in the U.S. and other countries. According to a popular hypothesis, Operation Terra del Fuego began as early as 1944. Allegedly, valuables worth $400 million were smuggled from the Third Reich to South America. Hundreds of fake companies were established in Argentina, through which a portion of the gold reserves were moved from Europe. A significant amount of these valuables were transported to Latin American countries, typically in the form of gold bars that were sold there. The proceeds were used to establish entire German colonies where Nazis could live. Perhaps Hitler had good reason to plan for the future of his possessions after his death. Was a project indeed prepared in the dying days of the Third Reich to create a new Aryan state? There was a flow of activity focused on establishing what could be considered a Fourth Reich in Latin America. This was all funded by valuables, primarily gold, although money was also transferred there. Only a few people knew the full truth about the treasures of the Third Reich, including Martin Bormann, the Grey Cardinal of the Nazi Party. In August 1944, he met with German industrialists and informed them that, by order of the Führer, an evacuation of valuables was being prepared to create a future Fourth Reich. Bormann had access to information about all the repositories containing paintings, gold, and other valuables, as well as the most promising military developments, which were also incredibly costly. All of this was under Bormann's control, and he knew where everything was hidden. He was a unique individual, and as such, his capture was a priority for almost all the world's intelligence agencies of the time. It should be noted that Martin Bormann likely possessed the most complete information about Hitler's wealth. After Germany's surrender, Bormann went into hiding. However, the press regularly reported sightings of him in various South American countries. So, did the Nazis succeed in smuggling out the looted gold, or was it hidden within the Third Reich's territory? In February 1945, the building of the Reichsbank was heavily damaged during the bombing of Berlin. According to some historians, it was then that the decision was made to evacuate the valuables from the city. Specifically, salt caves were chosen because they are dry, unlike regular caves. These salt caves were used to store the valuables, which were specially packaged to ensure long-term preservation. The entrance was blown up, and no records were left behind. Around 1 billion Reichsmarks and a large portion of Germany's gold reserves were hidden in a salt mine in Thuringia. In secrecy, a special train and then heavy trucks delivered the treasures to their destination. They were discovered quite by accident. In 1945, American forces arrived in one of the mountain regions. As they were driving through, some local residents stopped them and asked for directions. The locals mentioned a very interesting place nearby, and when the Americans went to investigate, they found an entrance to a cave filled with immense treasures. It is also worth mentioning the fate of the exhibits intended for Hitler's museum in Linz, which was never completed. Starting in February 1944, works of art were transported to mines located in the Alps. When it became clear that the war was lost, the Gauleiter of Upper Austria, August Eigruber, ordered the mines to be blown up. However, local miners managed to remove the bomb. The collection was saved, and the Gauleiter ordered the traitors to be executed, but it was too late. American forces had already arrived at the mine. In September 1948, it was reported that the U.S. Army had discovered around 1,500 hiding places throughout Germany, containing valuables worth $5 billion in the prices of the time. All these treasures were handed over to the Commission for the Return of the Gold. Both American and Soviet intelligence agencies were involved, and a significant number of valuables were found in these salt caves and various underground storage facilities. Thus, a substantial portion of the Nazi gold was recovered. The valuables were returned to their places of origin. However, not everything was recovered. Historians claim that by the spring of 1945, approximately 7% of the Reich's gold and foreign exchange reserves remained in the Berlin vaults. Obersturmführer Friedrich Rauss was tasked with transporting these reserves. After being captured by the Americans, he revealed that he had left the gold in the barracks of the mountain rangers in Bavaria. He claimed to have no knowledge of the gold's further fate. This is where the mystery deepens. For some reason, the Americans released Rauss, who then moved to Argentina, where he became a co-owner of a metallurgical plant. Historians believe that Rauss simply bought his freedom from the Americans. Subsequently, in exchange for their lives, Nazi criminals revealed the locations of these valuables, typically to American troops, who were more than happy to retrieve them. Some of the valuables were returned, but not all. A portion was kept as compensation for the effort expended to liberate the country. The valuables that the Nazis removed from Hungary on the so-called gold train were not returned. Out of the 80 wagons, reportedly no more than 38 were returned, and even then, only to the victims of the Holocaust, as Hungary had requested their return. However, the Cold War began, and Hungary found itself in the bloc of socialist countries. The Americans quietly dropped the issue of transferring the remaining valuables. What remaining valuables? 2/3 of that train were never returned. There are varying reports about what portion of the cargo was obtained by the American military. However, it is a fact that the legitimate owners of the valuables received almost nothing. When it comes to gold and other valuables, the Americans certainly used this situation to their advantage.